And live from Studio 14 here at Aljazeera headquarters in Doha, I'm Elizabeth Puranam. Welcome to the News Grid. Prayers around the world for Jamal Khashoggi 6 weeks after he was murdered inside Saudi Arabia's consulate in Istanbul. Those praying there did so before an empty space where the journalist's coffin should lay, as his body still hasn't been found. Meanwhile, reports have emerged of another audio recording from inside the consulate, which casts further doubt on Saudi Arabia's version of events. Also on the grid, 2 surviving leaders of Cambodia's Khmer Rouge become the first and probably last to be found guilty of genocide. We'll look at the significance of the ruling almost 40 years after the regime's reign of horror ended. Also, a UN official is barely able to hide his despair after a 2-week mission around the UK to assess the state of poverty. Philip Alston is accusing the government of inflicting great misery on its people with policies that he describes as a social calamity. And Brexit, he says, will only make things worse.
And I'm Sarah Khayyad looking at why a sexual assault case in Ireland has prompted women around the world to post pictures of their underwear online. Send us your thoughts throughout the show, and the hashtag is AJNewsGrid.
You're with the News Grid live on air and streaming online through YouTube, Facebook Live and at aljazeera.com. Istanbul, Ankara, Jakarta and London, these are some of the cities where prayers have been held for journalist Jamal Khashoggi 6 weeks after he was murdered. In Istanbul, there was an empty space where his coffin should lie. His remains still haven't been found. Turkish investigators believe the body was destroyed by the Saudi hit squad that killed him inside the kingdom's consulate in Istanbul. Now, Saudi Arabia says it will seek the death penalty for 5 suspects, accusing them of killing Khashoggi in an unplanned rogue operation. But that's being called into question by another purported audio recording from inside the consulate on the day of the murder. Turkish daily newspaper Hurriyet says the 15-minute recording captures the moments before Khashoggi entered the building. The paper says the Saudi team can be heard discussing how to kill Khashoggi. Let's go now to our correspondent, Tony Bertley. He's joining us from outside the consulate in Istanbul. And Tony, what more are you hearing about the latest audio recording?
Well, although this has come from Hurriyet, we understand this is probably a leak from the Turkish government, but she's been leaking quite a lot to the Turkish media. This new audio recording is said to be 7 minutes long. And one of the significant things about this is that the authorities say that there was no sound of any kind of persuasion being used against Mr. Khashoggi to persuade him to go to Saudi Arabia. That's in contradiction to what the Saudis have said. In fact, they say that there was probably a murder. The murder was probably carried out by either a rope, strangulation by a rope, or by a plastic bag. And this goes directly against what the Saudis have been saying all the way along. They've also talked about a 15-minute audio recording where it was done before Mr. Khashoggi was murdered in the morning, and that showed that the so-called Saudi hit squad were discussing ways of how to murder Mr. Khashoggi. Again, this goes against what the Saudis have been claiming, and that it was one of those on-the-moment decisions that was made. And also they talk about, in the last couple of days, a phone call that was made from the Saudi consulate to Saudi Arabia, where someone said, tell your boss the deed is done. So the question is, who was the boss? Now, they've taken great pains to say that this was not Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman. It was nothing to do with him. They've exonerated him. 21 other people have been either indicted or are under investigation for this crime, but not the Crown Prince. But this new revelation, which we think comes from the Turkish government, does suggest that it's someone high up within the Saudi court. And in fact, the Turkish authorities are suggesting that this now takes the case back to the doorstep of the Saudi royal court. So if it wasn't the Crown Prince, then who was it?
And Tony, all of this, the latest recordings, the latest revelations are coming on the day that cities, that people around the world have actually been holding prayers for Jamal Khashoggi 6 weeks after he was murdered. How has the day been marked in the city that he was killed in and elsewhere in Turkey?
very somber moments here in Istanbul. This was going to be a place that Mr. Khashoggi was going to call his home. He was going to get married to a Turkish lady. He's been taken very much to the hearts of Turkish people here. So the commemorations were very deep and meaningful and very somber. And it was around the country, not just in Istanbul or Ankara, but also in mosques throughout the country. So they feel this quite deeply. And also the Turkish government feels it very deeply. It happened on their watch, if you like, and they feel very strongly that this can come to a conclusion. The constant drip of information, the constant drip about revelations is something that people are asking questions about also, but also the question about what will America and the European Union do about this terrible, brutal killing. And people are starting to feel a little bit kind of concerned and pessimistic that the real culprits of this murder may get away with it totally scot-free.
Today we want to honor his soul. If we can do this prayer today, we will honor his soul and we will be happy, of course. But our needs will not end with this funeral in absentia. We are looking for real justice for Jamal's soul, for Jamal's family, for journalism in the world.
And justice is the question. Will justice ever be achieved in this brutal killing, or will the real perpetrators get away with it? And basically, all eyes are now looking to the United States, Britain, France, Germany to see if they can bring this to a right and just conclusion.
Tony, thank you very much for that. For now, that is Tony Birtley with all the latest live in Istanbul. Now, our correspondent Nadeem Barber went to a mosque in London where more prayers were held.
Well, this North London mosque is one of those places that has answered the call by the fiancé of Jamal Khashoggi for people to gather and say those special funeral prayers in absentia for him. Hundreds of people have turned up here, basically for the regular Friday Jum'ah prayers, but also for the special ceremony. And in London in general, there's a very strong feeling amongst the Muslim community that what happened was a heinous crime. Firstly, because he was a journalist, and there are many people who've come from the Middle East to settle in London as journalists to exercise free speech, many of them opposing their governments. But secondly, there's simply the human element, the fact that his family were not able to have a funeral. And one of the organisers of today's events told me that that's why it's so important right now.
For a journalist to be silenced, to be eliminated in the way that Jamal Khashoggi was, resonated throughout the world. But also the fact that his family, his loved ones, the people who were closest to him, were deprived of the very basic right of actually praying the final prayers upon him before he's buried. And then the call by Khadija Jenkins, his fiancée, to the world, to Muslims worldwide, that the way in which to remember Jamal Khashoggi is to perform the prayers upon him from which his family were deprived. So I think that responding to that call was the least that we could do.
Well, the sermon here was actually given by an imam who's a Saudi dissident himself, and he listed the number of crimes under Islamic law that were involved in the killing of Jamal Khashoggi. And then he also outlined the circumstances, according to the Prophet Muhammad, in which killing somebody was permitted, and explaining that those circumstances were not met in the killing of Jamal Khashoggi, and therefore he is in effect a martyr.
Well, let's get more on this now. We're joined by Saad Jebbar, international lawyer and political commentator. As we mentioned, Mr. Jebbar, you are an international lawyer. What does the latest recording mean for the Saudi explanation that this killing was not at all premeditated, where the recording shows the Saudis in the consulate discussing how to kill Mr. Khashoggi?
It is the opposite. It is premeditated because the monitoring team came first before the day of the murder. Another team arrived well equipped to do exactly to kill him. The evidence is irrevocable there. And thirdly, there was an arrangement to dispose of the body outside the consulate. So you have Saudi, let's say Saudi competence because it happened within the consulate. It doesn't mean that Saudi Arabia has not perpetrated international crime against the Vienna Convention, which grants sovereign immunity to the embassies and to diplomats, not to allow these diplomats to turn into nest of Daesh-like murder or assassination or crimes. And that was extended to the Turkish territory, or Turkish competence and jurisdiction, because another crime was committed in taking the parts of the body and disposing of them within the Turkish territory. The more the Saudis talk, the more they indict themselves, and all aspects and all evidence is complete there to show that the Saudi government, Saudi state, was involved through its officials in this series of crimes, not only one crime.
The Saudi government and the Saudi officials, but the key question, of course, remains how high up in the Saudi government and officials. There's no end of speculation, of course, that this murder was ordered by Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman, who is in charge in Saudi Arabia. But has there been any evidence definitively linking him to it?
When you look at the political constitutional structure in Saudi Arabia, nothing could be done without the authorization of Mohammed bin Salman. He is the only man who is in charge. Suppose Mohammed bin Salman was a director of a company in the United States or the United Kingdom or France. If such crime happened, if he didn't know, that means he failed his duty to know. But if he knew, that means he was involved. So either way, if he was director of a company, the least you could do at this stage is to freeze his functions and his post until the investigations or the trial takes place.
But the Saudis, of course, have shown no appetite to freeze, to limit his power in any sense, and they're not getting any real pressure from their biggest ally, the United States. They are under so much political pressure with each new revelation or recording that the Turks reveal. But how far do you think the Turks are willing to go in terms of legal pressure? Will they use the Vienna Convention that you're talking about to actually take this to the United Nations and have an international investigation?
Look, the Saudi scenario or narrative should be completely discarded because they cannot be judge and jury. They lied from the word go. They kept lying. And then they accepted, and although they were living in denial, they admitted by installment every time they were admitting something. So you have two jurisdictions. The Saudis say they have jurisdiction, and they cannot be judge and jury. The Turks say they have jurisdiction, and practically we know that there is no way the Saudis would extradite those accused, and the truth could be only established through an international mechanism, either through Security Council, with Turkey going to Security Council and submitting all the evidence and calling for an international investigation by independent jurists, and then an international prosecution. There is no alternative to an international investigation and prosecution.
Given America's veto power on the UN Security Council, would they allow an international investigation into their ally, Saudi Arabia?
I would go there, and let's see whether the Americans will side with an international criminal, a terrorist state, which accepted that they have committed this crime, but they were trying to lay or to create a firewall between the top officials, which is namely the Crown Prince, and the lower or the smaller fish, in order to not allow the net which will catch the big fish, which is Mohammed bin Salman. And also, what happened to Jamal is the tip of the iceberg. Saudi Arabia, we know that there are hundreds of people who are in prison without any charge or any credible charge, and the crimes they committed also in Yemen. So if we could establish, and we can establish, that there was crime against humanity, you can go also to the International Criminal Court. But in the interim, the Western powers, the democratic powers, should act collectively in order not to be, let's say, subject to pressure by Saudi Arabia because of pragmatic reasons, because of arms deals.
Because of economic interests.
The key is collective and concerted action according to what the European Union suggested. Otherwise, the truth will never be revealed. And if you allow this bully to win, you will have no stability in the region. If Mohammed bin Salman is allowed to get away with this crime, he will not only destroy Saudi Arabia, he will also be a threat to the region and to the state and the people of Saudi Arabia themselves.
Mr. Jabari, it is great to get your expertise on this. We really appreciate it. Thank you for your time. Thank you. Now, there are, of course, so many different important strands to the story which affect many people and countries, and you will find all of those explored, along with all the developments on the special page on our website. It is called Jamal Khashoggi, and you'll find it on top of Aljazeera.com. Moving on to other news now, and Palestinian protesters have been gathering at the barrier fence between Gaza and Israel for Friday protests, despite calls to stay away. This week, organisers in Gaza urged restraint after a ceasefire was agreed between Palestinian factions and Israel on Tuesday. The truce ended the heaviest fighting between the two sides since the 2014 war, but it triggered a political crisis in Israel's government, with the defence minister resigning. Hoda Abdelhamid has the latest from near that Gaza-Israel barrier.
Many Palestinians have returned to the border fence area, as it has been the case every Friday for the past 8 months. But certainly there's much less tension here, and we have actually seen just maybe a handful who tried to approach the fence itself. By and large, the protesters stayed away from that fence, and it seems that the authorities here have made sure that that was the case throughout the day. We also haven't seen any of the burning tires or any of these arson kites that some Palestinians were flying across the border into Israel with these handmade petrol bombs attached. None of that today. Very few tear gas in retaliation. Also, we haven't heard much of these pops of live ammunition or rubber-coated bullets. Now, keeping the border quiet and lessening the tensions of the border are one of the preconditions for a long-term ceasefire. And certainly from what we saw unfolding here today, it seems that both sides are keen on keeping this border quiet and continuing on the political track. The Egyptian mediation delegation has arrived here last night. It was first in Tel Aviv. It has held talks with the senior leadership of Hamas, and the message we are getting is that these talks, regardless of the escalation that happened earlier in the week, one that had worried many here in Gaza, and many were wondering if an all-out war could break out. Well, it seems that politicians are still willing to give the ceasefire agreement another chance.
Now, we also have a special page called Gaza for all the latest developments and analysis. And in there, you'll find an episode of Mehdi Hassan's Upfront. There it is, where he looks at whether another war is imminent in Gaza. And now to something related to Palestine. It is Ilhan Omar's first week in office in the US, and she's trending again. This time, the newly elected congresswoman is under attack for her support of the BDS movement, which seeks to boycott Israel and its products. Our social media producer, Sarah Khairat, is here to explain, Sarah.
That's right, Elizabeth. Ilhan Omar's backing of the movement has long dogged her political career, and pressure is stepping up now that she's going into Congress. But organisations like the ADL, that's the Anti-Defamation League, it's a global NGO that fights against discrimination and anti-Semitism, tweeted its alarm that an incoming congresswoman supports BDS. It says it doesn't just criticise the Israeli government, but denies Israel's right to existence. And her supporters, in turn, are mobilising a campaign with the hashtag #IStandWithIlhan. You can just see it there, tweeted by Ian. And these organisations that are part of this also include American Muslims for Palestine and the Jewish Voice for Peace. Now, a petition has been created which states, "We stand with you in the face of Islamophobic organisations attempting to attack you and undermine your leadership." And there's more reaction on social media, Most of it is in solidarity with Ilhan. This image that has been shared several times on Twitter and Instagram, of course, in support of Ilhan. And the executive director of the Jewish Voice for Peace, she tweeted, Rebecca, she said, to support the non-violent BDS movement is an increasingly popular position in the democratic base. It's completely legit. Now, the BDS movement has attracted plenty of headlines this year. The singer Lorde was called out actually a while ago by the organisation for plans to hold a concert in Israel, and Lorde ended up cancelling it, generating a storm of controversy. Now, BDS also criticised Hollywood A-listers who attended a gala dinner in LA earlier this month, organised by the Friends of the Israeli Defence Forces, and they include the likes of Gerald Butler, Ashton Kutcher and Pharrell Williams. Now, the event raised $60 million, quite a record for the Israeli Defence Forces, veterans and their families as well. Now, the Palestine team, the organisation behind the campaign, coined the hashtag Hollywood Funds Terror on Twitter to denounce Hollywood stars' support of the Israeli army, and it was off the back of that event. But others also wrote to a number of celebrities on their social media pages. They targeted them, asking them to stop supporting the Israeli army because of its involvement in war crimes. And then when Pharrell posted just about 3 days ago, people called him out. What he tweeted is this, saying, "Be kind, you have no idea how much it might help the next person." But he ended up with plenty of responses, all related to Palestine. This one is a picture here replying, saying this is a pharmacy in Gaza the IDF bombed yesterday, and plenty of other people there, George Galloway, and bombed out buildings as well in Gaza. So that gives you an idea of the images. Now, we'd like to know what you think. We would always want to hear from you. You can get in touch with us directly. Message me on Twitter @SarahKhairat.
Now, they murdered, enslaved and tortured their fellow Cambodian citizens in the 1970s. Now, 2 top officials of the Khmer Rouge regime have been found guilty of genocide. A UN-backed tribunal has delivered the historic judgment against 2 of Pol Pot's deputies, sentencing both to another life sentence. But as Florence Louis reports, many victims' relatives are wondering if justice is being served at too great a cost.
A landmark ruling. Guilty of genocide, the first and only such charges against former leaders of the Khmer Rouge. 92-year-old Nguyen Che, known as Brother Number 2, second in command to Pol Pot, was found guilty of genocide against the Muslim Cham and Vietnamese minorities. And former head of state Khieu Samphan, who is 87, was convicted of similar charges against the Vietnamese. The court also found the pair guilty of crimes against humanity for killing, enslaving and torturing people at labor camps, prisons and execution centers around the country, and jailed them for life.
Delivery of the judgment today in phase 2 of case 002 is an historic achievement in the work of the extraordinary chambers in the courts of Cambodia. This court has once again demonstrated that it has the capacity to prosecute and try the most complex cases in accordance with international standards.
Almost 2 million people, about a quarter of the population, died during the Khmer Rouge rule from 1975 to 1979. Uk Sun Lay survived, but his Vietnamese wife and 3 children were killed.
It's been 40 years, but I still can't forget. I think of my beloved wife, my beloved children. I try to forget, but their death still haunt me.
Friday's decision was welcomed by victims of the Khmer Rouge, many of whom had turned up at court to hear the judgment against the 2 accused.
The main question now is the future of this tribunal. It was set up 12 years ago and has cost more than $300 million. 3 people have been convicted. The Cambodian Prime Minister Hun Sen, himself a mid-level Khmer Rouge commander before he defected, has said no more suspects should be prosecuted.
There are cases against 4 other Khmer Rouge members, but it's not known whether they will proceed.
We're not requesting that every Khmer Rouge with a bloody hand is tried. That is not reasonable. That's not practical. But what we are requesting and what we are saying is that 3 is not enough for the lives of 2 million individuals.
But despite its flaws, others say the court has delivered some justice, however long that has taken. Florence Louis, Al Jazeera, Phnom Penh.
Now, women around the world are posting pictures of their underwear on social media after a man was acquitted in a rape trial in Ireland. Sarah is back with the details, Sarah.
That's right. Outrage has been growing since the defence lawyer for the accused held up a pair of lacy underwear that the teenage victim was wearing on the day she said she was attacked. Now, the female lawyer then said to the jury, does the evidence rule out the possibility that she was attracted to the defendant? You have to look at the way she was dressed, she said, and she's also added she was wearing a thong with a lace front. The jury ultimately found the man not guilty. But the defence's use of underwear has triggered howls of protests by women who say it's a shocking example of victim blaming. Now, on Tuesday, socialist politician Ruth Coppinger added her voice to the outrage, accusing the government of inaction over the issue of sexual consent.
It might seem embarrassing to show a pair of thongs here in this incongruous setting of the doll.
Deputy.
But the reason I'm doing it, how do you think a rape victim or a woman feels at the incongruous setting of her underwear being shown in a court?
Taoiseach to respond.
And when is this doll going
please.
to take serious action on the issue of sexual violence?
Taoiseach to respond. 3 minutes.
Now, soon after that session in Parliament, this is what Ruth tweeted. She said that she'd heard the camera had cut away from her when she held up the underwear, but reminded people that in court, victims can have their underwear passed around as evidence. And the demonstrations were organised under the hashtags "This is not consent" and "I believe you." These are some of the hashtags that were used, with more women globally joining the protests on social media. And this picture says, "My clothes don't determine my consent." Now, someone else shared a picture of a painting on a wall which says, "Not asking for it." Another person tweeted, "These pictures feature 'It's not consent' with the caption, 'Disgusting and shocked at the Irish justice system right now.'" Now, the head of Dublin's Rape Crisis Centre did not question the verdict, but criticised the barrister's remarks, and she called for reform to a legal system where rape stereotypes are still prevalent. As always, we would like to hear your thoughts. Get in touch, and you can message me anytime on Twitter.
Thank you very much, Sarah. Now, if you're with us on Facebook Live, AJ Plus will explain a growing internet phenomenon called blackfishing. And ahead on the news grid, tackling racial tension in Germany. Angela Merkel does a Q&A session in a city that exploded with right-wing violence a few months ago.
I first became aware of blackfishing like a week ago.
It's blackface and it's cultural appropriation.
They're not just doing blackface, they're pretending to be someone who is black or at least mixed with black.
Women who were white presenting previously, now looking darker, lips look fuller, hair in more ethnic styles per se.
So they get to have that whole black girl magic, you know, exotic looking exterior and facade, but yet you can still see that they have the standard European features.
We are in a time where Black women are becoming more comfortable with themselves and accepting themselves as the standard of beauty. We're no longer looking at white women and white bodies to be our standard of beauty and what we seek to achieve. We're finding that within ourselves.
I'm really disgusted that people are out there defending this and saying that what's wrong with a tan, what's wrong with curly hair, what's wrong with this? Like, there's so much wrong with it, but it seems like a lot of people don't understand why it's wrong.
We continue to be the fetish. We're more than our full lips. We're more than the different shades and brown that our skin comes in. We're more than the many different hairstyles we wear.
It really downplays actual black and mixed or just, you know, non-black people of color who are on social media, who are trying to gain a following, trying to make a career for themselves, because we're just now getting pushed to the side for all of these people who are posing to be us.
For some white women, it feels like our pro-blackness is anti-white, but it's not that. It's just us finally accepting ourselves and loving who we are. And we have so many layers to us through the trauma that we carry, through the knowledge that we gain, and just being Black in this country.
You're with the News Grid live on air and streaming online, and this is what's trending on Aljazeera.com. Prayers held for murdered journalist Jamal Khashoggi in a number of cities around the world, including in Saudi Arabia's Mecca and Medina. We've also got an article about Donald Trump and what if he is what America is all about. That and much more on our website, Aljazeera.com. And we want to hear from you on all the stories that we're covering tonight. We've had a lot of people sending their condolences to the family of Jamal Khashoggi. Kani on Facebook wrote, "Shameful murder, don't let them get away with it." You can send us your comments to any of our online platforms. On Twitter, just use the hashtag AJNewsGrid. Our handle is AJ English. We're also on Facebook, facebook.com/Al Jazeera, or send us a message on WhatsApp or Telegram. The number is +974 501 111 49. Now, Britain's Prime Minister has been taking calls from radio listeners to try to win public backing for her Brexit deal. And as she does that, some of her colleagues are attempting to drum up enough support to remove her from the job. On Thursday, several of May's ministers resigned in protest against the draft EU divorce agreement, including the man who helped to negotiate it. Well, many are waiting to hear the full intentions of another senior minister, Michael Gove, who says he supports the Prime Minister but not the deal. Well, let's go now to our correspondent, Paul Brennan. He's joining us live from London. So the utter turmoil that we saw on Thursday, Paul, it seems to have subsided for now, but what is Prime Minister May's strategy on how to deal with this fallout?
Yeah, the froth and the fury that we saw here on Thursday has definitely subsided. It's a much calmer atmosphere here in Westminster today, and that respite has given the Prime Minister the space to actually pursue the strategy that she began on Thursday with both the 3-hour session in the Commons, in the Parliament, and then a news conference at 5 o'clock afterwards. With a radio interview, a phone-in show that she took part in this morning. And it's given her the opportunity to put her case as to why this draft deal is the right one, in her opinion, for the UK. You know, she's put forward policies that Britain is leaving eventually, the Common Agricultural Policy, will eventually escape the jurisdiction of the European Court of Justice. And eventually, there'll be an end to freedom of movement. Now, that kind of message wasn't getting through in the first 48 hours since the leaks actually started to emerge on Tuesday. So she is actually starting to put across her arguments. And the hope is that the fact that there's been no additional resignations today from her cabinet colleagues means that she's able to do that without having to also fight fires from disloyalty from within her own government.
She's trying to get public support, Paul, but can public support make up for a lack of support from her own party? I mean, where are we at there?
Yeah, I mean, as far as the process goes for a leadership challenge, I mean, the reality is still that she is under pressure from her own party. There are rebels within it, hardline Brexiters, who are unhappy with the deal that she's come back with and are not happy with her as Prime Minister. At the last count, some 21 members of her party have submitted letters to a backbench committee, the 1922 committee. If they reach a threshold of 48 letters, then they will be able to trigger a no confidence vote. But they're a long way short of that yet. And of course, there's no guarantee that even if they hit 48, that they would then be able to push on and get 150 or so that they would need to actually oust her. So that's a possibility, but it's not looking like an imminent possibility at the moment. And that means the Prime Minister can press on with the strategies, as I say, of making her arguments to the country.
And Paul, how will the EU be looking on at all of this?
Well, the EU is looking on it with a certain amount of sang-froid, if I can use the French. They are, not willing to stick their oar into the choppy waters of Westminster politics per se. But what they are making it clear and known is that they don't want to renegotiate a deal that's already been done by the government of the UK. They're giving short shrift to any idea that, say, for example, the opposition Labour Party could suddenly come in and open up a whole new tranche of negotiation and somehow get a different deal. No, that's not on the cards. They're pressing ahead with the idea of a November 25th summit in Brussels, in which they're going to examine the deal that's on the table and most likely sign it off and then throw it back here for Parliament to ratify or not come early December.
All right, Paul, thank you very much for that. For now, that is Paul Brennan live in London. Now, as Theresa May stands firm over her Brexit deal, she is facing criticism from another corner, this time the United Nations. A new report says her government's policies are inflicting unnecessary misery on the poor. The leading researcher for the UN, that's Philip Alston, has just wrapped up a 12-day tour of the UK where he spoke to people struggling to find their next meal and families facing homelessness. Now, 1/5 of the UK's population lives in poverty. That's about 14 million people. And remember, this is one of the richest countries in the world. And that number is set to rise after the UK leaves the EU. Alston says the government doesn't have any plans to protect the poor or middle class who'll bear the brunt of Brexit's economic impact. He says the benefits system is often punitive, mean-spirited and callous instead of providing support. And he's accused May's government of being in denial about the impact of its austerity measures on society.
It's a totally mechanical economic analysis that ignores the damage that I think is being done to the fabric of British society, to the sense of community, which has been built in part around the sports centres, the recreation places, the public lands that are being sold off, the libraries that are being closed down, the youth centres that are being downsized. And soon there will be nowhere for people in the lower income groups to go. It's perfect because those higher income groups will have more money because their taxes are being cut, but they will find themselves living in an increasingly hostile and unwelcoming society because the community roots are being systematically broken.
Well, we are going to get more on this. We're joined by Ben Reynolds. He's the Deputy Chief Executive of Sustain, which is an alliance for better food and farming. And he's joining us live from London. Very good to have you with us on Al Jazeera. So this latest UN report saying that 20% of the British population are living in poverty. What does that mean for their access to food? And what could Prime Minister May's Brexit deal or a no-deal Brexit mean for food security for the poor in Britain?
Thank you. Yeah, it's really shocking findings from the UN's report, and but not surprising as well. I mean, certainly the work that we're doing with communities across the country, it just demonstrates all the problems that we see that they're facing. And these problems are caused by a number of different problems. Firstly, problems in terms of how much they can afford in terms of healthy food. Whether they're out of work, whether they're in work poverty. We've seen supermarket workers going to food banks. Austerity is clearly having an impact. The changes to the benefits system, this is all having an impact. And you're right to say there is a link with Brexit as well. Brexit, it's certainly, we've already seen problems around job losses with potentially more to come. And equally, the risks around a no-deal Brexit are well documented. We have food businesses highlighting the potential delays with border checks, queues at ports, which means that some perishable goods are going to be more difficult to import. And this is going to put real problems in terms of particularly those who find it hardest to afford a good diet. There are in the longer term, there's a myth around being able to get sort of better trade deals in order to get better prices.
Right.
But this doesn't really sort of follow through.
So then what needs to happen with Brexit to ensure that there isn't a lack of food for the poor?
I think certainly we need to see some kind of deal. Whether on the Remainers side, whether you think people, whether we just stick with the deal we've got. We've already got a very good, trading relationship with the EU, which could either be preserved by, remaining in the EU or having some kind of agreement. Certainly, a no deal is going to sort of spell trouble, I think, in terms of access to affordable food.
And Mr. Reynolds, I would like to ask you a political question, if I can. We know that some suffering from austerity, if not poverty itself, voted for Brexit. What impact do you think austerity or poverty had on people who voted to leave in the referendum?
I think there's a lot of different sort of rumours going around about why did people vote to leave, and often they get used by different political forces to their own agendas. I think it's certainly a complex situation, and I think a lot more that has come through. I think it's been a real wake-up call for the Westminster bubble, if you will, that actually there's a lot of people who voted as a protest vote because they wanted to see some kind of change. Whether what is actually on the table and what different politicians are kind of offering is actually going to solve that, I'm not entirely convinced. What we need to make sure is that actually there are jobs and there is decent benefit support and a decent underlying that, a decent availability of good food for all, and that I think sadly may get lost in amongst all the political wrangling.
Mr. Reynolds, it is great to get your expertise, your insights into this. That is Ben Reynolds from Sustain joining us live from London. Thank you.
Thank you.
We are going to Germany now, where Chancellor Angela Merkel is in the eastern city of Chemnitz, talking to locals about the racial violence there 3 months ago. Far-right demonstrations turned nasty after the killing of a German man that police blamed on 2 migrants. Let's go now to our correspondent, Dominic Kane. He's joining us live from Chemnitz. What will Chancellor Merkel's message be there, Dominic, and is it one that's welcome?
Well, she's been speaking to the readers of the local newspaper. It's called the Freie Presse. And she's been speaking, Elizabeth, now for the best part of about 15 minutes to an invited audience of readers, about 130 people. But there have been some pretty pointed questions to her about what the government has done, how it has allowed a situation to develop in this city where such scenes are possible. Certainly, as I say, pointed questions. There's a warm reception for her, but also many people here are expectantly waiting to see what she has to say. And she has been saying, we are aware of the problem, we're trying to make things better, we want to understand what people's concerns are. The question will be whether that's going to mollify some of the people who live in this city, who've seen what's happened and who really want answers from her and want to see change. She, as I say, has stressed that she wanted to see for herself how things have been unfolding here. But it's worth making the point that one of those particularly pointed questions was, why has it taken her so long to come here, seeing as the violent scenes you referred to there, Elizabeth, took place in August?
And why has it taken her so long, Dominic, and how tense has the situation been since those demonstrations?
Well, it's interesting here that that question about the length of time it's taken is something that her political opponents have raised as well. I interviewed a member of parliament from the far-right party, the Alternative for Germany, yesterday, and his answer was, well, she's running scared of people here. She doesn't want to hear what people have to say. Well, clearly she's here today. She's hearing what they have to say. Insofar as the violence is concerned, a lot of it has been, as it were, happening under the radar. We know of what happened at the end of August. The fact that there was that altercation in which a local Chemnitz resident was killed in, as I said, that altercation that involved 2 migrants. We also know of other incidents. A Jewish restaurant was targeted for violent attacks, also a Persian restaurant has been targeted. So you have a sense that there are isolated incidents that have been going on in this city since that moment in August, where we see those scenes our viewers are seeing right now of the violence that took place then. Angela Merkel's answers, so far at least, have been to say, well, there needs to be understanding. People have to remember that the right way to deal with problems is not to take to the streets violently, but to talk about what the problems are and to appeal to the government, to appeal to their politicians to solve things. One very interesting question put to her was, we feel like second-class citizens here. What can you do about it? That's very interesting because Angela Merkel, remember, comes originally from East Germany. In her answer, she said, look, I come from this part of the old East Germany too, and I understand your problems. I understand people feel that capitalism maybe has left them behind, that there's no one looking out for them, that their concerns aren't being addressed. But she said, we are here to address your concerns, but the answer is not violence. It's not supporting parties that don't necessarily want to coalesce around mainstream policies. That's what she's been saying so far, Elizabeth.
Dominic, thank you very much for that. For now, that is Dominic Kane live with the latest in Chemnitz. Thank you. Now, the United Nations has extended the mandate for its peacekeeping mission in Central African Republic for another month. That's while Security Council members negotiate whether to prolong the deployment. Meanwhile, 170 Russian military instructors have already deployed in the country and more are to come. Aljazeera has been granted exclusive access to the instructors' operations into rebel-held territory. Our correspondent, Nicholas Hark, has more on their presence in the country from the town of Bria.
Miss Bangui 2018. A beauty pageant in a country torn by sectarian violence, courtesy of the Russian Federation. The Russians are on a charm offensive in the Central African Republic. Meet Valery Zakharov, the new special advisor to the president, dispatched by Moscow. The Kremlin is keeping a close watch on a country the West is ignoring. 14 rebel groups are fighting one another, pitting Muslim and Christian communities against each other to control a country larger than France, rich in minerals, diamonds, and gold. From above, the scale of destruction becomes visible. These are abandoned villages and ghost towns after rebel attacks.
All countries are doing their best to help. To get peace is a challenge. There is no simple solution, but we think we can achieve this.
It is under Russian escort that we travel deep in the country to Bria in rebel-held territory. Here the Russians have set up a well-guarded small clinic. In the waiting room is a short video playing on repeat, celebrating this new alliance between the two countries.
Look, we get a little bit to eat, a little medicine. This is war. We will take the help that comes until we can return home.
Dr. Aljazeera Ivanov is treating 30 patients a day.
This is a community suffering from the trauma of war. The gunshots, the fear, and the lack of access to healthcare has made things worse for them.
In September, 30 Christians were killed by a Muslim militia in Bria, in what the UN described as potential war crimes and crimes against humanity. In the west, you have the anti-Balaka fighters that are in control. The center, east, and south are various Seleka militia groups fighting each other to control the area. We wouldn't be able to film here if we weren't under the escort of the Russians. They're right behind the camera and we can't film them. But since their arrival, the fighting here has stopped. 170 Russian military advisors are in the country. Some are deployed in the northern border. More are expected to come in the months ahead. Critics of the Kremlin say this operation is led by mercenaries here to steal diamonds in exchange for security, a claim they deny. While Russia's presence is unsettling to the West, the people of the Central African Republic, too often ignored, are now finally getting the attention they deserve. Nicholas Hawk, Al Jazeera, Bangui.
Now, in what WikiLeaks is calling a cut-and-paste error, the US Justice Department has accidentally named Julian Assange in a court filing. The indictment came to light when prosecutors filed papers for a case that actually had nothing to do with Assange. It appears they pasted text about the secrets-sharing website by mistake. It would suggest that prosecutors have prepared charges against Assange, but it's unclear what those charges would be. Assange has been holed up in the Ecuadorian embassy in London for years, fearing he'll be extradited to the US to face trial for disclosing classified information. Now, separately, US Special Counsel Robert Mueller is looking into Democratic Party emails that were published by WikiLeaks as part of his investigation into Russian meddling in the 2016 presidential election.
Well, Julian Assange has been trending worldwide. Thousands of people, 96.3 thousand tweets, in fact, and it's at number 13 right now, and that has been changing throughout the day. But many are pointing to this man, Seamus Hughes. He's a former US Intel police officer, and he's the one who discovered the inadvertent disclosure. Now, so many are also thanking him for sharing his expose, including MOB, who says WikiLeaks supporters can now write to their UK MPs with more confidence in an attempt to stop Assange from being extradited from the Ecuadorian embassy in London to the US. Now, the reaction is always very much the same whenever Assange's name makes the headlines. People are very divided in their opinion, but some, like US writer Marcus Johnson, who tweeted also, believe that he's actually a criminal who has conspired, he said, with authoritarian governments, rather, and Marcus has used the hashtag #LockHimUp. That's a term often used by Trump supporters. But you've got people like Executive Director of Human Rights Watch, Kenneth Roth, has called this latest development deeply troubling, adding the Trump administration has shown little regard for media freedom, with Assange doing exactly, he says, what journalists do all the time. And this is where a debate has surfaced on social media over why journalists are hanging back in defending Assange. And one of those is Chris Hedges. He's a Pulitzer Prize winner and has written, "The media's refusal to defend Assange," let me bring that down below there, "is a betrayal," he calls, "of press freedom." Now, calls have also been renewed on the people that are saying that they should try and get as many signatures as possible, 15,000 in fact, to petition for the release of Assange. And a person who tweeted here, this is Streko Horvat, he said he visited Assange yesterday at the embassy in London. He says he's in good spirits and ready to fight, but now he needs our support more than ever. Extradition to the US, it's not some kind of conspiracy, he says, and he's called it a real threat.
Sarah, thank you very much for that. Now, the top sports trends are next. Brazilian star Neymar claps back over a report that he gets paid to applaud his fans. We'll hear from Neymar. That's after a snapshot of the weather. It's time to find out what people are talking about in sport today. Joe?
Elizabeth, yeah, you know how Sarah was telling you about WikiLeaks earlier? Well, have you heard of Football Leaks? It's a website that for the last 3 years has revealed transfer fees and contract information for famous players and top football clubs. Although it went quiet in 2016 after reportedly struggling with technical and financial problems, the website resurfaced last week with more revelations. And they say they've been working with an investigative body and media organisations, most notably the German news magazine Der Spiegel, to uncover some eyebrow-raising stuff. Now, among the more unusual allegations is that Brazilian star Neymar is paid hundreds of thousands of dollars to applaud fans at the end of Paris Saint-Germain games. PSG denies that. Neymar even posted this on his Instagram story. You'll be able to see it there. Look, he's put fake news across a headline in Portuguese. He then added, "I don't know which is worse, the source of the rumours or those who report it, a group of misinformed idiots." So that was earlier in the week, and Neymar may have thought that he'd put the issue to bed, but while preparing for international duty with Brazil, who face Uruguay in London later, he was asked about it again, and again the PSG star clapped back.
I'm very sad, very upset, because they're making these things up, things that are not real. I'm sad for some part of the media that give importance to that. I think it is a lack of respect when something is not true, and then they don't even ask, they are publishing that news. I think it's bad. I think they are losing credibility when they are speaking about this, and they don't even come to me to ask for my version.
Neymar clearly bored of facing the media on this subject, maybe not as bored as his 7-year-old son who sat through that media conference alongside his famous father. Neymar revealed that he's promised his son he'll join teammate Richarlison in the pigeon dance if he scores against Uruguay on Friday. If you haven't seen it, find it on YouTube. The things we do for kids, eh? Take singing superstar Shakira, for example, who has 2 children with Spain and Barcelona centre-back Gerard Piqué. She used her famous voice to cheer on her son scoring during a session at Barcelona's football school. Well, if you think Shakira has rhythm, then you'll also be pleased with the latest efforts of the France team. They entertained us throughout the World Cup, and now, as they prepare to play Netherlands in the Nations League, Antoine Griezmann and Ousmane Dembele have been at it again.
On est heureux parce que la saison 3 de The Last Kingdom arrive. Avec coup de traite de November. Ça, c'est une bonne musique, hein.
All right, well, it's award season in Major League Baseball, and one of the top trending sports stories in North America over the last few hours has been all about the winners of Most Valuable Player. Christian Yelich was voted MVP in the National League. His team, the Milwaukee Brewers, shared this video of him receiving the news surrounded by family, friends and teammates. Yelich, who only joined the Brewers in the spring, helped them to first place in the MLB's Central Division. And Mookie Betts was given MVP honours in the American League. He helped the Boston Red Sox to their 4th World Series title in 15 seasons. And it's been a happy time for him away from the field too.
This is Miss Kinley Ivory. She sleep right now. This is, but she decides to sleep now. She doesn't sleep at night, which is kind of
sleeps pretty good.
But,
all that yelling, she slept through it.
Yeah. I don't know how she's still asleep right now, but. You know, I guess I'll give her a pass for right now.
So baby Kinley was born just 9 days after the Red Sox won the World Series. It's been a busy few days for Betts, and lots of people have been congratulating him for all of his achievements, in fact, online. They've been congratulating him. Los Angeles Angels outfielder Mike Trout, who came second in the MVP vote behind Betts, was one of those. And this picture on the back of the Boston Globe newspaper has also been shared by lots of fans. Mookie Betts becoming Mookie Best. All right, well, Paul will be back with more sport at 1800 GMT. But for now, I will hand you back to Elizabeth.
Joe, thank you very much for that. And that will do it for this News Grid. Remember to keep in touch with us on social media, and we will see you back here, Studio 14, on Saturday.